It's lovely to be introduced by you. Since you're so involved with all this community engaged work that we're going to talk about, I'm just going to share the slides and pass it on to Amanda, who's going to start us off.
Hey, hi, everyone. Like Mary said, my name is Amanda Dominguez, and I am a community organizer and ESL program coordinator at New Labor. So thank you all for joining us today for this presentation. And as Mary said, I'm joined by Marina and Dan. So we're here today to present with you the Family Math Project, a semester-long collaboration between Rutgers GSE and New Labor. So let's start off by reviewing our agenda for today. We will talk about the Family Night project background and context, the pedagogical and theoretical foundations, guiding principles and practical application, the lessons learned throughout the project, and recommendations for sustainable community engaged programming and research in the future. This is our Family Math Night team. Mary so kindly introduced many of the people on this slide already. She introduced Christelle, Marina, and Dan, and Jessica on here as well. We also have Daniela Tirnovan, Catherine Tavares, who is also part of the Rutgers community, and myself, and lastly, Jennifer Garcia, who is also a community organizer with New Labor and an ESL program facilitator. So a little bit about New Labor. New Labor is a nonprofit worker center that educates, organizes, and fights for better working conditions and social justice in the workplace, and has been working with community members for over 20 years. We have around 4,000 members within our 3 centers of Lakewood, Newark, and New Brunswick, and we work to empower them and amplify their voices in the community, workplace, and political realms. New Labor is a local leader in the National Campaign for Immigration Reform, and in a number of federal and state and local campaigns as well that address workplace injustices and unfair wages. New Labor has helped empower workers to recover over $1 million in unpaid wages, from overtime not being paid out, to unpaid sick days, to just employers refusing to pay. Hundreds of members have learned English through our educational programs that we offer as well, and many are still participating in our in-person and virtual classes daily. My role in this collaborative effort was to invite members from New Labor to participate in the Family Math Nights, as well as ensure that New Labor's learning methods and principles were included in the process. I also made sure that English supports, family voices, and inclusivity were at the center of the collaboration. It's important to note that New Labor's strong community relationships contributed to the openness and effectiveness of the planning committee and the overall project. So let's talk about the Family Math Night. On a regular Family Math Night, families are invited to school, and parents and guardians work on mathematics activities with their children. Teachers facilitate activities and share information on how to better support children in their mathematical development. It's a linear one-way communication from educators to parents and students. In our Family Math Night, the learning was 3-directional because we were using the small group activity method, the same method we use at New Labor. Where families were learning from the facilitators were learning from the families, and families were able to learn from each other's experiences. Through this method, we learned from parents about how they use mathematics at home and at work, as well as the challenges they encountered with school-based mathematics. We then designed activities to be implemented virtually that bridge the realms of school and family while maintaining that participants' life experiences and language repertoires at its core. Our Family Math Night started with the creation of a parent planning committee, which you can see in the photo here, where we brainstormed ideas and surveyed the committee about their experience with math activities. We then created lessons around that feedback from the planning committee and ensured that language, math, and tech supports were in place. With everything in place, we then held the math nights, and they were a great success. At the end of the project, we sent exit surveys to gauge participant satisfaction and also to consider future improvements. To get a better understanding of the virtual math night was like, we can do a short activity together.
Dan, are you?
Oh, I didn't realize I was doing this. So this is one of the activities we did with all the parents and children. And so I'll do it a little bit with you. This will require some participation. So the question is, which one doesn't belong? And then to think about why not. ¿Cuál no pertenece? ¿Por qué no? Who wants to share? I can't see in the room, so I don't know if anyone there is willing to share.
We have someone in the room.
I say 3 doesn't belong because it's blue.
Okay, so 3 doesn't belong because it's filled in with blue as opposed to the other shapes being filled in with green. We have some in the chat. Amy says number 1 doesn't belong because it has 3 sides. So we're thinking about the different sides in the figures as opposed to whether it's filled in or not. David is saying the same thing. Tiene 3 lados, 3 sides. Mary agrees. Ravit saying number 3, also because it doesn't have an area. And Musa, 1 is shaded, others not. 1 is with 3 sides, others with 4. Any other ideas about which one doesn't belong? All shapes belong. You can say that too. 2 because it's the only one with right angles. Okay, so 2 doesn't fit because it has right angles as opposed to the other shapes. Now Mary's on the bandwagon as they all belong.
Yeah, that's a good one.
So, yeah, so anyway, this is the type of activity we did with them to get them started. The nice thing about something like this, as opposed to, this is kind of derived from Sesame Street, if anyone remembers those, where there really is supposed to be only one answer. There's multiple ways to kind of see these. There's ways to reason where all of these don't belong for some reason. You talked about the number of sides. You talked about right angles. You talked about whether the figure was filled in or not. You could argue that number 4 doesn't belong because there's no points up or down, as opposed to number 2, 1, 2, and 3. So there are different ways, and particularly this kind of reasoning. Nama just said that in the chat. This kind of reasoning gets a lot of dialogue on the table, which puts more on the language of mathematics, but it also gives lots of different ways to reason. And so this is the type of thing that we're really pushing classrooms to start to do more, but also we wanted to bring them in to get their reasoning on the table, and for there to be more than one right answer, and multiple ways to think about it. And this is the book that we took the activity from. It's a really thoughtful book. There's one actually more for kids, and then there's one actually for teachers to support teachers more in reasoning, like about the different ways in the various shapes. They get more and more complex. You can get into middle school with some of these too. So, it's a fairly simple activity, but it's really complex for the reasons you can get into about why things are similar or different.
And we would usually start a family math night with an activity like this that Dan demonstrated. And then at the end, we would raffle some of those books between the families who were participating. Now, I'm going to talk to you about some of the things that allowed for this collaboration to happen. As Mary mentioned, the SIF grant, I'm going to call it SIF grant. I don't know if it's SIF, but the SIF grant allowed to redesign those courses in the advanced certification program. The idea was to include some community engaged components in these courses that were online courses. Also, I think taking advantage of some of the expertise we gained throughout the pandemic of using more remote technologies. The grant allowed for a different kind of support than some of our other community engaged programs that the GSC have, especially through hiring a program coordinator, Jessica, who is not here today, but was fundamental for this collaboration. that allowed to first develop an ESL curriculum in partnership with New Labor as well, that is actually being used during this semester. And it also allowed us to pilot and iteratively redesign the family math nights. And also the TA position allowed me to also provide additional program coordination support, which we can't emphasize enough how much that's important to a project like this one.
Okay, and here you can see the pre-established relationship that New Labor and the GSC has. We have done many collaborations together, such as the Conversation Cafe Tree program. Through the Chancellor Strategic Initiative Fund, we have collaborated on curriculum development for language education and elementary education programs, ESL and bilingual bicultural education course projects, the SEER project, our Family Math Night project, info and brainstorming sessions. Currently, we have several ongoing collaborations for online and in person, including the conversation cafes that are going on right now, ESL classes, and Bonner student support. So this program wouldn't be possible without a relationship of collaboration and trust built across the years. And it's also wouldn't be possible without the deep relationships and trust that New Labor has with its members that it built over the 20 years that it's been in the community. So next we'll hear from a New Labor member about what New Labor means and what these classes mean to them. It will exemplify the relationships that we're talking about here that have been built over the course of 20 years in the community-driven work.
Llevo mucho tiempo como miembro aprendiendo inglés y pues ellos me han ayudado mucho aprendiendo inglés porque he podido llevar a mis hijos y poderlos tener ahí conmigo mientras yo aprendía, ya que en otros lugares pues no se puede. También pues uno se siente en familia cuando uno llega a New Labor. Uno tiene la confianza de llegar y poder convivir con todos. Y pues es un momento muy agradable que pasamos todos.
Oh. Sorry.
Llevo.
Okay, so going back to some of our structure, right? So that we needed to have some collaboration between math education and language ed specialists to create this curriculum and also to create the language supports to be able to engage these parents that were often Spanish dominant. The language ed specialist was also working as the instructor of the ESL or bilingual bicultural advanced search students, which served as our facilitators. Of course, New Labor was a very essential piece. Having the community organizer in our team allowed us to stay aligned to our orientation and our principles, but it also allowed us to recruit the family planning, the community planning committee. There were about 10 parents and guardians, mostly New Labor members who had children in K-5 schools in New Jersey, and they had to attend a number of required events to provide us feedback and support in designing and redesigning the program. And later on, New Labor also allowed us to recruit people to attend the family math nights. And of course, it was fundamental to have our program coordinator supporting to make all these pieces work together. And then in terms of our goals, one of the things we wanted was that this engagement with the families was flowing in multiple directions, not just from teachers to families. We wanted the family math nights to reflect, value, and center families' mathematical ideas, experience, and multilingualism. This was, of course, supposed to be a learning experience for our GSC students, and also a way to explore the possibilities of learning together in a virtual space. And to get to all of that, and to really learn from our community planning committee, we needed to create the program in a way that allowed for cycles of planning, reflection, and enactment, and again, planning, reflection, and enactment. So we did that through our engagement with the community planning committee in our first cycle, and that took a lot of time. That took a lot, that took some paid staff, right? That took money to pay people to be organizing all of those events, paying the families, compensating the families to be there, the community planning committee, and also careful listening to truly incorporate people's feedback into our program. Dan, are you going to take over for?
Oh, I think I'm just doing principle 2, right?
Well, okay. I can keep going. So just some of our pedagogical and theoretical foundations. We try to work from an asset-based and empowering stance towards co-learning. So we really take seriously this idea of learning from community members. We draw very heavily on New Labor's expertise. I know a lot of us in the GSC feel very committed to equity, social justice, and solidarity, but we feel like we need an entity like New Labor that has been focusing on action for social change to be able to enact that orientation in a very practical way, also drawing from their experience with empowering and educating the community, and also from the multilingual community members' expertise, drawing from that and from their funds of knowledge and mathematical practice to build our project. So through the project, we were very focused on building and sustaining relationships. As was clear before, we were drawing from this very long relationship we have at New Labor, but we were also building and sustaining that relationship. We were constantly revising our design to re-envision ways to be community engaged, to be doing community engaged partnerships and practices, and to be developing shared principles and practices and curriculum, materials, professional development resources, and investigation. So we were in constant dialogue, the whole team. We were like meeting weekly for the first cycle, to actually be able to not just talk about those orientations and principles, but to actually put them in practice. So we were focused on practice and action and trying to collectively create and animate and sustain this collaborative spaces of learning that center and celebrate community expertise. And constantly, of course, questioning ourselves if we were actually achieving that. So here we're just gonna watch a little excerpt from one of our initial interviews where we were trying to learn about how families used mathematics in their daily lives. And I think it's just an example to illustrate how much often schools and we often approach families with the understanding that they don't know math or that they have challenges with math. But actually, once we talk to people, we realize that there's a lot of work with math that they're doing in their work and in their daily lives.
Bueno, yo prácticamente fue en Honduras que yo estaba estudiando sobre mecánica. Se le dice automotriz o industrial, una de las dos cosas. Y uno siempre usa las llaves ajustables para medir el tornillo, si es de 3/4 o media o de 1 pulgada. Y también lo hago aquí también en la casa. Cuando uno va a hacer un trabajo en el hogar, yo siempre lo hago. Mido la distancia de donde voy a atornillar el tornillo. Y también con la escuela de mi hijo también, el pre-kinder. Entonces, por veces nos ponemos a contar los pasos de aquí a la escuela, o también nos ponemos a poner a ver las figuras, el cuadrado, el rectángulo, el triángulo y el círculo. Y el de tercer grado también le enseño métodos de cómo sobre la matemática. Por veces le enseño con los dedos, por veces le enseño con objetos, con lápiz, con bolitas, con rayitas también.
So again, just an example of like a parent who was doing a lot of really resourceful things to support his children with mathematics, and also drawing from a lot of daily life activities. So this was one of the first steps in our project, was like learning about the ways that families use math in their daily lives, and also the ways they support their children with their school-based math. So we've talked about our guiding principles a little bit, but we want to get in more detail. We've touched upon our feedback cycles and implementation and reflection cycles, but we wanted to exemplify that. We collected data in this project. I mean, I don't know if we want to call it collect data because it was not a research project, it was an action project, but we were collecting data or information in 3 different ways, through an initial brainstorming session with families, and then a few parents were interviewed as well. And then after each family math night, we had a reflection session when we heard from families about how things were going for them and how we could improve. That allowed us to understand families' mathematical repertoires and practices, so the ways they were using math in their daily lives and how that can be bridged with the school-based math. We learned more about what families' challenges were in supporting their children with school-based math. And then we also learned how to improve the design of the program to better serve those families. One thing that we noticed after our first family math night was that parents stood back a little bit and just supported children, but didn't participate. So during the reflection session, after this first family math night, we learned that parents weren't sure if parents were supposed to be participating much. And they suggested us sending a preview of the topic beforehand so that parents can prepare for the topics themselves psychologically. So to promote parental participation, we needed to give them a preview of the topic and also time for questions just for parents after the session. Those were 2 things that we learned from this reflection session. So we started sending a family letter with a preview of topic, bilingual list of words we were going to use in the session, and also some activities to do at home. That was also an opportunity to send some tools to promote involvement, particularly in the measuring activity. You can see here that we sent families measuring tapes and paper clips to think about non-standard and standard measurement. And we had a wonderful response from this change we did. From our second reflection meeting with the planning committee, we can see here a couple of quotes. And I'm going to read them and translate them. I liked a lot the material. I liked that you sent it in the mail, what was going to happen. It was easier because we had an idea about what we were going to do. And then afterwards, a lot of parents were reporting that their children were measuring everything. They were measuring, in the activity, we measured each other's hands. So like they were measuring their parents' hands and feet. They were measuring cups. They were measuring tables. So we had a very good response. And more broadly, I think parents appreciated seeing that their feedback was listened to and incorporated. So they said that the structure and the flow of this event was better because our opinions were listened to and incorporated.
All right. So I'm going to talk a little bit about what we mean by bridging the community and the parents and families' knowledge to the school mathematics. And we did it in a few different ways. So we're going to show you some of these, but embedded in this is both in figuring out what knowledge they had. You watched the video of one of the parents earlier talking about the ways in which he supports his children. And so we were interested in the ways in which they were supporting their children, but we were also interested in the ways they were using it in their everyday life. And sometimes that meant that they weren't all that aware of it because it was so embedded. So we actually started with some group interviews with parents to try to elicit the ways in which they were using it. And so this is one of the questions from that. This is a little bit different, but we started with trying to get into the ways, because we had construction workers, we had domestic workers, we had warehouse workers who were participating from new labor. And so there are ways that all of those jobs use mathematics, and we wanted to get those on the table and try to bridge some of those to what we were going to do. The other piece we were trying to figure out is the kinds of things that they wanted support from the project in terms of connecting to mathematics. And so this question is one of those to figure out. And oftentimes we asked in English to see if this was sometimes an issue of English in presenting the mathematics. And And so you see, they asked us to translate quadrilaterals on the first one, and we actually gave it to them in Spanish, and they said that, the translation didn't help in this case, but they still were able to piece it together from the words in Spanish, from cuatro and cuatrolados to quadrilaterals. And so sometimes in this case, it was a formal math language that became an issue. So one of the things that, I didn't really push in that opening activity was the formal math language. It was really an opening activity to begin to discuss. So we didn't talk about vertices and that kind of thing. So sometimes people talk about corners or sides or all these things. And so what we really wanted to do was not necessarily overvalue the formal mathematics language, but if that was something they wanted access to, then we could help bridge that. And so that was actually one of the things, particularly around geometry, that was a challenge, because there's just so much language and so much technical language around this. And clearly it wasn't because they couldn't talk about sides or angles or this kind of thing. And so we're going to show you a few pieces of the activity we developed. But initially it was really about getting them to see four-sided shapes in their home, right? And not necessarily upfronting some of the kind of big mathematical words. And this is a little different. And this was something I think we, in talking across the project, we realized is a little bit different in math education with supporting second language speakers, is oftentimes in mathematics, the more you upfront the language, the more people think they don't know anything about the topic. And this is actually about geometric shapes. And so people, primary school children have some knowledge about this. So we knew they had knowledge about this. And so we didn't want to upfront the language. We actually wanted to upfront their ideas. And so you can see that we have different representations about four-sided figures, and getting them to see these figures in their home that were already there. And then we actually bridged to some of the more formal mathematics language, a closed shape with four sides, the quadrilateral, and you can see beginning to draw those relationships. We also had a number of language supports, but we pulled out some of the shapes on this slide to get them to begin talking about something that's similar and different. So we started with a quilt that had different shapes, and then trying to help them see those shapes in quilts, or in this case, a blanket, before we got to something a little more abstract. And you can see the kind of word wall on the right, and the supports, the sentence frames on here, which I think Amanda is going to talk a little bit about. Maybe it's Marina, more specifically. But then we got to something that was more abstract, which is just a shape with little context, but we were really attempting to bridge the context to some of the mathematics with various language supports. And so, at the same time, we also wanted to value what they wanted support for from the project. And so, around geometry, a lot of that was language heavy, but we provided various supports, and we also didn't want to overvalue some of the things. And then the last thing is, we wanted to give them something they could do in their homes multiple times to keep practicing some of the mathematics. And so we would start this in the family math night, and then allow them to kind of try to support them to continue doing it. Because one of the things we wanted is we actually wanted parents doing the mathematics with their children. And so we tried to think about various activities. This is only the geometry one. We have other ones. Marina mentioned the measurement. We tried to give them activities they could do repeatedly together to continue to practice the mathematical ideas in their home.
Okay, and here we have Principle 3, Family Math Nights Welcome and Build on Families' Multilingualism. Here we will talk about how we drew from families' feedback to fulfill this principle that is so important to us. Honoring the family's home language and encouraging and building upon their multilingualism. After our first family math night, as Marina had mentioned before, we were trying to understand why parents were not as involved as we would have liked them to be. And one thing we learned is that they didn't get enough language support. These are some of the planning committee's responses. We have, cuando se enseña en inglés de la manera de que se demostró, deben hablar un poco más despacio. So one of the points was that when you're supporting and showing English in this way, you should try to demonstrate it a little bit more slowly. We have her son speaks almost no English, so it was hard and he was frustrated. They only translated for him when it was his turn, so he missed out on other aspects of the activity. And lastly, in her group, there was someone who would translate if no one was answering, and it was very helpful for the parents. So that was a good piece of feedback that we got as well. So in order to address these comments, we reinforce these strategies with our facilitators in the rehearsal and preview for the sessions. You can see under strategies, we have check for understanding of concepts and directions by inviting contributions in Spanish and English and clarifying and modeling in Spanish. The examples here are really good. We have comprendemos que son cuadrilaterals. So do we understand what are quadrilaterals? Do we understand what we're going to do in this activity? We're going to look at 2 quadrilaterals and we're going to answer some questions. So really just clarifying what the activity actually is so that everybody's on the same page and then would be more willing to participate. In the second strategy we have down there, acknowledge responses and contributions across languages by inviting contributions in English and in Spanish and restating them in English, and sharing and inviting contributions from English to Spanish. So if someone said, oh, cuatro lados iguales, if they said 4, equal sides, you can say, yes, these shapes have equal sides, and just reiterating that in English. All right, and to ensure everyone was comfortable during the sessions, we use these slides to model to families that they could use their home language at any point as well. When we welcome people, we would say, welcome, bienvenidos. We're glad you're here. This is a space where we're going to speak English and Spanish, and together we will practice math and English. It's okay if you don't understand, there's no problem. We're here to use English and Spanish to communicate and clarify any of your questions as we do the activities. So while we did provide some direct translation on screen, as you can see in these slides, we also ensured that in every group there was a facilitator who could offer primary language support to those who needed it. We wanted this to be a fun and enjoyable learning experience for parents and students, and wanted everyone to feel connected to the activities and engaged. So on this slide, you can see some of the language supports we provided on screen for people. What do you do when you don't understand? And having that in English and Spanish, being able to say, can you repeat it? Puedes repetirlo, por favor, so that everybody could understand the activities and ask clarifying questions.
And so some of the things that we learned from this experience, we learned a lot of things, but some of the things we want to highlight is that this commitment to asset-based work means disrupting norms often associated with institutional relationships and intentionally positioning parents as experts. So we were learning from parents. That was the starting point of our project. We were, of course, always learning from our partners at New Labor, who were providing this fundamental expertise for this project to happen. We also learned that the remote setting, even though it brought challenges and a lot of planning and organization to get ready for that, it also allowed for an expanded understanding of what community is. We had participants joining from all different parts of the state. And we also learned that valuing community input means focusing on a process as much as project outcomes. So if we didn't allow for this time for the feedback loop to operate, we wouldn't be able to really incorporate the family's feedback. And so we think this is a very exciting project, and it's very valuable to our GSE students and faculty, but it's also very important that we consider sustainability. I think developing long-term mutually beneficial relationships with community-based organizations and making sure they are actually mutually beneficial is essential to do work like this that draws from the amazing work that New Labor has been doing for 20 years. Creating opportunities for honest feedback from both the staff and the members was essential for us, and then actually allowing time and consideration to implement that feedback into change. We can't highlight enough how much it's important to invest in paid university staff positions to coordinate outreach, logistics, and various research projects. We had Jessica here in the GSC for 2 years, and that allowed to implement this project and a number of other projects. Unfortunately, she's not here with us today because she's no longer working at the GSC. But we think it's fundamental to have someone like her working in a project like this to allow for all these very complicated pieces to work together. We also think it's very important to compensate the community-based organization staff and members. Here we gave a small compensation for families to be able to participate in the community planning committee, and identify all who have contributed conceptually at any point in the program or research, and insert and make sure that they are invited to participate in publications and presentations, right? So we as doctoral students and faculty, we are perhaps more involved with research, but we want to make sure that we're acknowledging the contributions of all this other people who are making such important work for these projects to happen, and making such important conceptual contributions as well. You've seen the slide before, that it shows some of the essential pieces in the project. We want to highlight that none of this would be possible without the money, right? Without having the CIF grant to allow us to have a program coordinator working with us, and to allow us to compensate the parents and guardians, because they wouldn't be able to, even if they were all very committed to their children's education, but dedicating so many hours is not possible. We can't be possibly asking people to dedicate so many hours without providing them with some compensation, especially considering these are working class families. And of course, this wouldn't be possible without the relationships, without the GSE's relationship with New Labor, and without the 20 years of New Labor work and all that was built through this time. So if we consider all that and sustain those programs, we think they can be wonderful learning and research spaces, both for our advanced search students, but also for our graduate students. And so here's also a list of references for anyone who is interested in the topics we discussed. We're very happy to share the slides afterwards. And since we don't often have the paid positions we refer to, we're definitely happy to get some doc students on board if people want to get involved, and that maybe can benefit their project as well as part of their research and teaching agenda. And that's all we had for today. So thank you very much. And yeah.
I don't know if it's back to me to lead questions, or Ravi, I know you're there in the room. Is there somebody in the room who wants to do that? I'm happy to manage any questions that come in the chat.
Any questions in the room? We have one. I don't know if we have anything on chat. Why don't we start here with Suga? Is that okay? I will text.
Okay, so people in the room, when you have questions, can you introduce yourself? Because I noticed when I was home the other week, it was hard to see who was speaking. So introduce yourself and then ask your question.
Okay. Yeah, I shouldn't unmute, right?
Yeah.
No.
Okay.
Just be loud.
Yeah, I will. Hi, I'm Sugat, and I am working as a postdoctoral researcher on a project with Ravi. And thank you so much for this fantastic presentation and great work. I have actually two questions, but and they are unrelated. I will just ask both of those, and you can then choose. The first question is about mathematics, how mathematics being presented and the forms of participation that was envisioned for everybody in that family night learning space, right? So seeing mathematics as a problem solving activity versus seeing mathematics as a collective creative endeavor of which values certain things like logical consistencies and so on and so forth. So I was wondering, did you see any tensions of achieving both of those things? Because school mathematics typically gets presented in one particular way, but when you want to make this bridge, sort of having more expansive notions of what mathematics is about and how one thinks about one's participation in the broader field of mathematics, not just school mathematics. That was first question. And the second question is, about the community organization, new labor that you're partnering with, and do you see any connection sort of growing between the action-oriented community work of the organization and mathematics? So sort of mathematics being used in community action-oriented work, or community action-oriented work brought into the space of mathematics.
I can answer the first question. I don't know if Amanda had thoughts on the second question. I can't think of examples. Sorry, but maybe Amanda is aware of them. We haven't. I don't think we've done anything like on this project about connecting the mathematics with the action-oriented pieces of New Labor. But there might be ways that I'm not thinking about. In terms of the mathematics, one of the reasons we actually started with that activity was to open up a mathematics problem that had multiple ways of reasoning, that had multiple answers. And so for us, that started to set up the kind of mathematics we were working on. Some of the mathematics we worked on were about coming up with multiple strategies, which is being pushed more in schools, and to ask the parents, like, this is actually one of the things in the interview, like, is this kind of more of a struggle for you? And it actually wasn't, actually. I thought it would be. There's some work in the literature that says that can be a bit of a struggle, but that wasn't their biggest struggle. Around the measurement thing, it was like, we're really used to thinking about things in the metric system, but the US standard units are a mess and we don't understand them. And actually, one of the things that was really nice about this was that we actually had an interview with an organizer at New Labor that actually talked about, because they do safety trainings in New Labor. Well, they're all in US standard units, like the safety tracing that are from OSHA. And so, you have to do this 6 feet away and this and that kind of thing. And so we decided, both because I think it aligned with some of the stuff that New Labor was doing, and the parents were saying we need this, that it actually was a really nice blending of all of these ways that they wanted access to US standards and how to think about that. New Labor was doing some trainings that, there were requirements about buildings and safety things about, and so that really aligned well. The other piece that I think was we really had to work on was that these were language educators who were facilitating these conversations. They were not math educators. And so we had to, in some ways, I feel like, open up that space of what it looks like to teach math with multiple ways of thinking and a more open kind of thing with them. And so we actually built these facilitator guides for them, so they could think about, and they had like snippets of what to think about in the mathematics to try to open up the space. And so even thinking about the language supports, like Amanda presented on acknowledging different contributions, the reason that one of the reasons we did that is we wanted them to not say good job and just evaluate immediately. We wanted them to kind of recognize the substance of what was said, incorrect or correct. We wanted them to get out of this kind of correct, incorrect. And so we did think a lot about that. But I think in some ways it was more the facilitation of it to allow for, multiple languages, but multiple ways of thinking mathematically to come out. And so we put a lot of supports in there to try to pull that out and to get our facilitators who were really adept to the language piece to think about what does it mean to provide language support in a space that's often very restrictive and exclusive. And so, yeah, that's a long answer to your first question. I don't know if Amanda remembers the second question, but.
Yeah, I think so. I have some thoughts. Thank you for your question. So about how mathematics is connected to New Labor's action-oriented pieces. So I would say at New Labor, one of our main focuses is to empower our members, and we believe that empowerment comes through education. People feel sometimes when they see their children's math homework and stuff like, I don't know, I have nothing to offer, we have people from varying educational backgrounds, from, different countries. And then also, there may be a language barrier there, and they feel like they didn't have much to offer maybe their children in that aspect. And through this family math night, and we're pulling upon, their mathematical like repertoires and their life experiences and what they do at work and what they do at home on a daily basis, saying, well, you measure the baby formula using ounces, right? So that's math. You know, you're in construction and you're using a tape measure to measure out pieces of sheetrock or, you know, whatever they're doing. And that's empowering them and realizing that the knowledge that they carry with them and the experiences that they have matter. And it's empowering their voices to then speak up, maybe not only in the educational realm when they're looking at their kids' homework or dealing with teachers, but we're hoping that also transcends into our other educational programs like the ESL classes, like our health and safety trainings that helps them to speak up in the workplace when things are going poorly, speak up with their landlord when things over there are going poorly. So it might not seem like super clear, like how it directly connects, but I hope it helps to empower them and realize that, you know, they have a voice and they have stuff to offer and bring to the table.
Did you have anything else to add to that? Chanel, you wanna add?
Sure, I can add something. Just, I think after the first cycle, when we interviewed parents about how they felt about the whole process, we noticed they were saying it was good because we were learning math, right? They were positioning themselves as learners. So one of the sort of next steps that we try to implement in the second cycle was to incorporate what we were calling the community mathematicians in our session. So record people who use math in their daily lives and showcase the ways they do it. And that's when we actually learned from Olga, who is one of the New Labor organizers, that when she does OSHA trainings, she demonstrates to people what 6 feet is, because that's like this kind of height where you need protection, right? So how much math was playing a role in this specific work of organizing, but also like a seamstress and a carpenter. And that again, I think it gets back to the whole sustainability question, right? We weren't able to finalize those videos and that part of the project because the SIP grant was running out and we needed to prioritize keeping the materials in good shape so that the project could be implemented again when we were there to design it. But we kind of got that started, and I think that would be sort of, if this project was ever developed further, that would be probably the direction we take to highlight, like in the organizing, but also in like the ways that people are experts in mathematics in a lot of different ways in their daily lives.
Thank you.
Hey, advisor.
Did you have a question?
I do. I do want to just say that too. This is fascinating to me. I know we talked a little bit about this, Dan, but I really didn't know what you were doing. And you know, I'll be asking questions. I just mind my business. But it's phenomenal. And I think it makes me think of like a lot of the logics that we talk about. And we think in thinking about using math toward liberation, and the idea of like the helping people use math with their training, their word training and things like that. And then also I was thinking about the status issue and how I've done kind of math nights as a teacher, and how uncomfortable parents are when they come in the room, and these are like English language speakers. Like native English language speakers, how uncomfortable they are because math just creates so much anxiety for people. And I didn't even think to give them the work ahead of time, like to kind of front load it so that when they came in, the parents could feel like experts, and that the students would see them as experts in the topic, and just how phenomenal this is. And I'm just really looking forward to see like the next steps with it. This is phenomenal work.
Yeah, I think to point, Brittany, I think one of the things, and this was on the takeaway slide that Marina presented, was we obviously learned about sending a parent letter that would prepare parents for the topics, because some of them were like, I haven't thought about this in like 20 years. It's not that I don't know any of it, but I could use a refresher if you're going to talk about some of the ideas, which is a totally fair thing to do, but we hadn't thought of. And I think it's actually a pretty nice way, if you really want parents to participate, just give them a little inkling of what you're going to be doing. And so we actually wrote these parent letters around the different content we were going to be doing, just to give them a quick kind of rundown. And we sent them out in English and Spanish, so they could even see the mathematics language across the two ideas, and the activity was in there about what they could do. What actually some of the parents did is they started to do the activities even before the family math night with their children. So the children actually took the measuring tape and started measuring everything around the house. And they started to have some of these conversations. And so it actually made it not just about that one night, but something that was more sustained. But the other piece, the piece I was going to say about the takeaway is it takes a while to get people to trust institutions that we actually are going to value your mathematics knowledge that you bring to a space. And that, I think, was a much more, going back to the status thing, many of the parents were originally like, we don't have mathematics knowledge to bring, or we're really fearful of mathematics knowledge. And so some of it was unearthing that so they could see they already do have some of that knowledge, but then to show that we actually valued it and wanted to bring it in. And so, that's a long-term kind of thing, partly because they've learned that institutions don't value their knowledge. Institutions of higher education, education's, K-12 education. And so, I do think the status thing, especially in math, is a big one, and it takes some time to kind of break down the ways in which the history of education has actually been really exclusionary for many of the parents in our project. And so, I think that's the very long-term thing. You were mentioning logics to kind of disrupt the ways in which mathematics has excluded so many people.
Mhm. And I make a comment about that too. I think everything you just said, Dan, and how carefully you were organizing the work that you did, how much you were listening to the community, drawing on, their strengths, the way they use mathematics in their life, and trying to disrupt what could often be a deficit approach to the ways, especially families who are newer to English are using math in their life, was so important because the facilitators were students in the language learning across the curriculum, across the content area class. And so what you all, this whole team did was modeled for the students. And so that was such an important part here for our GSC students to hear about how carefully the work was done, to hear about how you're learning through the process and learning from the parents and from the community, because we want to model that for them to engage in that as well. So I just wanted to mention that layer of the work.
I think that's another, I want to make sure I'm getting this name right. Sugat, is that?
Yes.
Is that right? Okay. That's another piece too. What Mary was talking about is we actually modeled all the activities for the language educators. So they saw the types of intentions, and we actually provided space for them to ask questions about how we had modeled it. And so I think we were really intentional about trying to model in ways that opened up mathematical spaces rather than close them down. So it was about, creating more problem-solving spaces and more mathematics being open. So we did actually model that. I didn't mention that and kind of forgot it because there's actually a lot of pieces of all of this. But now that Mary mentioned it, that was another way we kind of tried to open that up more.
That's very cool. Thank you.
Thank you. This has been, I don't know if there are any more questions. We're out of time. Who do we have?
We put it in the chat.
All right, yes, we have Enrique Suarez next week from UMass Amherst. Please join us. Folks, there's a ton of food in the room, and I understand people like staying at home, but we order food and then there's no one here. So please come and get it. Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.